Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Susan Checka-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. And we welcome you to this online version of Tuesday Topics. The Friends and Foundation of RPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. This month, FFRPL's Tuesday Topics series focuses on the Rochester Public Library's critical role in fostering children's literacy, jobs in the economy, and equity and justice. Our talk today is entitled Repairing the Historical Record Through Community Collaboration. And you'll hear how the library helps to foster equity and justice in our society with diverse cultural community representation in programs and services, including Central Library's new archive of Black history and culture. Our presenter today is Christine Ridarsky, City Historian and Historical Services Consultant for the Rochester Public Library. Christine is the head of Central Library's Local History and Genealogy Division. She has a master's degree in American History from SUNY Brockport and an ABD in American History from the University of Rochester. Christine will be joined by Miko Griffin Mongeon. And Miko is the exhibit project manager for the Clarissa Uprooted project. It's a project of teen empowerment. And that project focuses on lessons from the Clarissa Street neighborhood, the once thriving African-American area of residential, cultural, and business. Was a community in Rochester's third ward. And we welcome Christine and Miko, and I will ask them, I'm going to unpin myself and have them start their remarks.
I'm just going to share my screen here for you. Okay. So good morning, and thank you all so much for joining us. Some of you may remember that just a little over a year ago now, I gave a talk on some of the projects we're working on in the library. And so what I'm going to do today is give you an update on the work that we've been doing in the library since that time. So I encourage you, if you're looking for a little bit more background on the things that I'm going to be talking about, go look for the January issue of Tuesday Topics on our YouTube channel, and you'll find a much greater overview of some of the work that we're working toward right now. That program was called Preserving Rochester's Black History at Central Library. And that was on January 26, 2022. So today I'm delighted to be joined by one of our project partners, Miko Griffin Mongeon, who's going to help talk about some of the work that we're doing in the community. But I just want to bring you up to speed and provide some updates first. So some of you who heard me talk last year may recall that we've been working very hard at the Central Library to diversify the collections in our local history and genealogy division. And much of this work dates even before 2020, when we began adding new collections, including the Jordan and Green family papers that document the history of Dr. Anthony Jordan and his wife, Catherine Jordan, the Dinkle family collection that looks at 5 generations of one African-American family here in Rochester. And I have to tell you, if you have not gotten to the library yet to see the exhibit on the Dinkle family, you need to do it soon because it's coming down in another week, and it is an absolutely fabulous exhibit. So stop by the 2nd floor of the Rundle Memorial Building and check that out. And then you may recall that it was back around 2019 that I began partnering with Teen Empowerment and the Clarissa Street Reunion Committee that we're going to talk a lot about today. I also began work with the Civil Rights Heritage Site and the Black Community Focus Fund to help develop some projects around a site in the Baden Street area and to do some oral history projects with them. And also we had been working with the Urban League on a digital heritage project to capture oral history projects. Unfortunately, some of the things that happened in 2020 have put a hold on that project while the Urban League deals with its anti-racism projects. But that is something that we're moving forward on through the library with less of a partnership with the Urban League right now. Of course, 2020 brought challenges for all of us with COVID-19. And of course, with the deaths of George Floyd, Daniel Prude, and too many other people in this country, which renewed the Black Lives Matter movement and spurred our community and our nation to have more in-depth discussions about race, equity, and inclusion. And it spurred us here in the library to take a real deep look at what we're doing and how we could begin to dismantle white supremacy here in the library, and particularly in the historical resources that we're providing. And so it was that year in 2020 that we really began our efforts with the Clarissa Street photo digitization project that we're going to talk about. We also received news of a grant for an urban renewal inventory that I will tell you a little bit more about. And we opened that Everyday People exhibit that, again, I encourage you to see before it closes. Last year was a really big year for us here as we really dove into this anti-racism and equity and inclusion work here at the library. We began planning for an archive of Black history and culture by forming an internal committee. We began strategic planning for the local history and genealogy division that is resulting in some changes in how we are doing our work here in the library. We received a grant in November from the Rochester Area Community Foundation through their Vitality Grant for preserving historical assets that is really going to move this work forward in this year. We began our urban renewal inventory project that had been funded in 2020, but that was delayed because of COVID. We began training people to conduct oral history interviews through the Rochester Black Freedom Struggle Oral History Project that's connected with the Black Focus Fund. And we also provided support here at the library for an anti-racism curriculum that's being developed through BOCES and other educational institutions in the community. So we've been very busy, but we've really just only scratched the surface. When I talked to you around this time last year, we were just forming an internal planning team for the proposed archive of Black history and culture. In 2021, that group really came together and we formed a team of staff from across the Rochester Public Library. This includes people here at Central, as well as through our branch libraries. And it includes people at all levels of job responsibility, from our clerks all the way up to our librarians and professional staff. And so we've listed here the information on the people who are part of this committee. All but one of the members of this committee are people of color working in the library. Shatora runs our teen center. Yusuf is our clerk in our circulation department. Derek runs the Safe to Be Smart program. Jocelyn Cox-Hiller is a librarian in one of our branches and also a former teacher, so she brings a lot of experience with education. Jonathan is a young man who's working as a library assistant, but is close to finishing library school, so we'll be eager to hopefully give him a position as a librarian. Sharika actually works in our finance department, so she is not normally connected with collections in the library, but she's agreed to join the committee and has been working very hard. Antoine McDonald, who, if you were at the presentation last year, you met when he co-presented with me. He is currently the only male African-American librarian working in the Monroe County Library System, and he's both proud to hold that position, but also disappointed that he is the only one. So he's been active to try to support other people like Jonathan who are trying to move into the field as well. And Antoine had joined the local history department here about 2 years ago now and has really embraced the work that we're doing. And then last but not least, Emily Morey is a library assistant here in local history. She is a PhD with a focus on African-American history, so she brings a scholarly perspective to this work. And as I shared with you last year, we were embarking upon a process to use a process developed by Michelle Caswell, who is a library information specialist at UCLA, who had put together a process for identifying and dismantling white supremacy in the archives. And we were just starting to evaluate our programs based on this process. And so over the past year, we've made a good deal of progress. One of the things that she talks about is that we need to ensure that we're educating the people working in our libraries to be able to do this work, and being proactive in diversifying our workforce and providing opportunities for people of color who may not otherwise have had these opportunities in the past. And so one of the first things we did last year was to provide training for those 10 staff members who had joined the planning committee for archives and Black history. And the idea here was to ensure that they had an understanding of what archival processes are, to provide them with experience and training to help beef up their resumes so that they could advance in the field, and generally get them engaged in this process. And so we were able to send the 10 staff peoples I just identified in the last slide to a certificate program. It was a month-long certificate program that was sponsored by the American Association for State and Local History. And most of those 10 members were able to complete that training and now have a certificate in the basics of archives. We were also able to work with the Rochester Regional Library Council to bring a trainer in, unfortunately through Zoom, to do 2 day-long workshops on archiving and preserving local history. And this was run by Stephen G. Fulward, who is a founder of the Nomadic Archivist Project and a former curator at the Schomburg Center for African American History. And his workshops were very, very popular. We were able to open it up to staff and community from throughout the greater Rochester region, and even attracted people from across New York State. And we were able to provide this training for 70 people, both people working in libraries and also community representatives. So we were able to use this workshop to start a conversation about what it means to archive African American history, and how communities and archivists can work together to do this work in an ethical way. The other thing that I was not directly engaged with, but that I think is really important to mention, is that the Rochester Public Library was able to negotiate an improved educational benefits for our part-time staff in the latest union contract. And this is something that we have been talking about for many, many years now. Under previous contracts, full-time employees, and if you're a full-time employee, that means you probably already have a higher education degree, if not a master's degree. You were able to have the city pay directly for tuition benefits to have you continue your education. Whereas until recently, if you were a part-time employee, you had to pay out of pocket to receive those benefits. You could get reimbursed for tuition, but you had to pay out of pocket, take that upfront cost upon yourself, and then be reimbursed, which of course is a hardship for people who are only working in a part-time position. So the library went to bat for our part-timers and made it now so that part-timers can also have their tuition benefits paid upfront to make it easier for our staff to advance within the field. The next thing that I talked to you about last year was a process involving looking at the current archival collections that we have and ensuring that they were being described in ways that were appropriate. And so our internal planning team has spent the past several months and continue to do the work of reviewing all of the description information about the archival collections that are in the library now. And we have one of the largest archival collections in the community. It's a collection that rivals the collections of the University of Rochester and the Rochester Museum and Science Center, but people don't know about it as much. So we're looking to really enhance those collections and enhance access to those collections. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to make sure that the collections were not causing problems in the way that they were described. And so we've been looking at those, and we've determined that A few of our collections do include racist language or content. The most egregious examples are in the Kimball Tobacco Company collection, which includes a lot of advertising materials from that factory. And they used a lot of characterized racist tropes in their advertising, including images. They also used the N-word in the names of some of their products. And as people were going through this committee, they were shocked to encounter these things in lists. And so we've made the determination now that when we are encountering things like that in our collections, we are adding some sort of warning at the beginning of a finding aid so that people encountering those collections will be warned in advance that they may encounter those sorts of things. What we noticed most in our review of these collections is that there is an overall assumption of whiteness as normative in the collections. And what that means is that we are calling out when a collection is about African Americans or Latino Americans. But if a collection is predominantly about white people, we don't call it out at all. And we also don't call out the fact that many of our local organizations were at one time or another exclusive. And so we are trying now to actually look at these collections and determine when we should identify something as being representative of the white community, when it is a segregated organization, and trying to be more specific in not othering people of color, but talking about people of different races and ethnicities in the same ways. And that means calling out when something is only about white people. The other thing we've been doing is we've been looking at the collections as a whole in the local history and genealogy department, and we've been re-examining what our department's mission is and what our priorities are moving forwards in terms of everything from what our collections include, the policies about how people access our collections, and what we're doing to reach out to the community as a whole. And so just in the past 6 months, the Local History and Genealogy Division worked with Causewave here in our community to develop a new mission and vision statement for the division. And the mission that we came up with is believing in the fundamental value and equity of all humans. And we did deliberately emphasize all here. The Local History and Genealogy Division preserves and ensures widespread access to inclusive resources and information about the diverse history of Greater Rochester and all of its residents. And as a follow-up to that, we've developed about 8 strategic priorities. I've only identified the top 4 in this slide, but we want to make sure that we deliver and develop and deliver relevant and innovative programs and exhibits that appeal to diverse populations. We want to increase the discoverability and accessibility of our resources so that people don't necessarily have to come to the library to access them. And we want to adopt innovative approaches to collections development and management to ensure that our collections reflect the diversity within the community. And some of that relates to the partnerships that we're going to be talking about. And as does the last one as well, which is that we want to engage in proactive, vibrant, mutually beneficial relationships with diverse community partners and respond to community needs and desires. And that mutually beneficial part is so important because the way that institutions like ours often have operated in the past is that it's been about taking away from rather than giving back. And it's been about co-opting people's history. And we're looking for new models so that we aren't doing that. We want to give the community control in this process and make sure that they're equal partners in this process going forward. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, is working with teen empowerment and the Clarissa Street Reunion Committee on a project that they first brought to the library. And I have to tell you that this project is one of the reasons why the library started to embark on this larger archive of Black history and culture. Because what we have found is that there are a lot of organizations and individuals out in this community who understand how important this history is and are trying to preserve African-American history in our communities, but they don't necessarily have the resources to ensure that those materials are preserved for the long term and accessible to the community. And so when the Clarissa Street Project approached the library, they approached us to be partners in the preservation and access side of things. But this is a project in terms of collecting and deciding what's collected and preserved is driven fully by the community. And so I want to turn it over now to Griffin Mongeon to talk about the project that she is engaged in and her work with that community on this project. So Miko?
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, Miko Griffin Mongeon. Honored to be here today. First, I would like to just give a little bit of background about myself, the Clarissa Street Reunion Committee, and our partnership with Teen Empowerment and the local history genealogy department. First and foremost, I am very embedded in the project in itself, as I represent the fourth generation of my family to have lived in the Clarissa Street 3rd Ward, now currently known as the Cornhill Neighborhood District. And I am still a current resident. As a matter of fact, several members of my family, including myself, were married there at the gazebo. So I've always been aware of the once thriving African-American community, stemming back from the early 1840s, as Cornhill 3rd Ward is documented to be the first community for African Americans in the city of Rochester. So, and with that being said, it also behooves me to be so embedded and passionate about this work, because I am a K-6 English language arts and social studies teacher. And I know firsthand when you're talking about educating and what resources are available and how accessible those resources are, if you want to connect with the youth in the community in which they reside in. So dating back in 2019, and we partnered the Clarissa Street Reunion Committee, which I am the youngest member in that community. We partnered with Teen Empowerment to bridge relationships between the elders in the community and that once resided in the community and that of youth. Because at this point, all they really can rely on are the oral histories and the storytelling of this once vibrant community. So from there, I know from firsthand experience, not only as an educator, but just being inquisitive, it was very challenging to find history pertaining to the 3rd Ward in one physical location. It was a lot of work, and giving credit to those that have done previous work regarding the history, it was like you kind of had to swim or fish to try to find out where this information was housed, or if it was housed within another organization or institution. It was very challenging to even access resources or images or documentation. So I feel that right now this is very timely in reflecting not only the African-American history, but inclusive in nature. The new mission statement of the local history and genealogy department is in direct alignment to the direction the Clarissa Street Community Committee is moving towards, as we are in a restructuring, rebranding process. But during this process, yes, resources are limited. Resources have been limited. So I am just thankful for this community project that we're working on, and for partnering with the Rochester Public Library. Most importantly, in speaking to the strategic priorities, as I mentioned, I know that there were only 4 identified, but specifically there are 3 that best kind of identify what it is that we're doing in representing the larger collection, the local Black History archival collection, is that for the Rochester Public Library, and specific to the local history and genealogy division, the increased accessibility of resources. That has been the driving force of our work. I know that I've had the privilege of meeting families, interviewing families, and it seemed to be very accessible to them. And that was some of the feedback that I've received so far. So I'm sharing that now with you, Christine. They really spoke upon how accessible the process has been, and the fact that it's located right in the city, in the hub in the city of our city. And also the innovative approaches to collections. Now, I know in partnering with Teen Empowerment, the youth that we've worked with in the creation of a documentary entitled Clarissa Uprooted, many of the youth, well, several, 2 to speak of, have had the opportunity to actually engage with the digitization process in ways that they may not have had that experience or exposure to do so. So in addition to myself, we are always engaging the teen empowerment youth, or the youth that actually worked and embedded themselves in the Clarissa Uprooted project, have actually come in, and word around town is, if you want a job, a really cool job at the library, so that's really great to hear right now from youth. And the fact that, it debunks the stereotypes of the library as just being a cool place to hang out. They have actually had an interest in the work that is currently being done and the process, as well as myself. I call myself somewhat of an apprentice per se, in receiving direction and just overall background in the archival process from both Christine and Brandon, and I'm appreciative. So that's been the most innovative approach right now, by embedding other members in the community in the process, and welcoming their input, and the fact that they trust their memories, their documentations with us speaks volumes. Oftentimes in not just specifically the African-American community, but any family. If you are sharing your most precious memories, rather it be documentation or images, they ask some really tough questions, and it's been very comforting in knowing that this is an all-inclusive process. You're welcome at any time to assess, to be a part of, as we move forward in identifying and building a larger local Black history archival collection. So that's where we are right now. And I don't know if I'm able to share my screen, but just to give a small background of some of the images and documentation that has been included in the collection thus far, that would be great. That would be great. I've had the opportunity of meeting some amazing people, even learning more about the local history of Rochester comprehensively. And it's been great. It's been great. So as a matter of fact, I know I have to follow up with some individuals because they're like, hey, is it my turn? Is it my Saturday? Is it my Friday to come and share? And that it speaks volumes to the work that we're currently doing, especially if they know that young people are involved and actually have an interest. So,
Miko, you do have the opportunity to share your screen, and while you're getting that set up, I'll just jump in here for a few minutes and
sure.
I just want to, talk a little bit more about how we're partnering on this project, because when Teen Empowerment and Clarissa Street Reunion came to the library, they wanted to know how they could build. First, they wanted to know how they could preserve all the oral histories that they were doing for the fabulous film that they made last year. And if you have not seen this film, please go Google it. It's Clarissa Uprooted. It's only about 20 minutes long. It's amazing. And I know there's a couple of showings coming up soon. I know there's going to be a showing at the Little, I believe in March.
That actually took place last week.
Oops, I missed it.
Yeah, finally on the big screen. Because of COVID, we weren't able to kind of get in there to do a premiere. So last Thursday, we had an opportunity to see this amazing work on the big screen. And it was so monumental when you're talking about historic preservation, because today marks the year anniversary celebration of my father's passing. And he is one of the elders featured in the documentary. So during that time, he is an educator, a scholar, history buff by nature. And as we were working on the project with the youth, one of his major priorities were the historic preservation of. And yeah, I'm able to go back and look and celebrate along with many other oral histories that have been collected in partnership with Clarissa Street community, as well as Teen Empowerment and the local history and genealogy department. That was a tongue twister, but I got it. So,
Yeah. And Miko, thank you for being with us today. I never had the opportunity to really get to know your dad, but everyone I talked to, he was a pillar in the community.
Yes.
And we're so glad that you're able to continue his work with us. So, and the other thing that we're doing in addition to preserving those oral history interviews is this next stage that Miko's been talking about, which is working with the elders in the community to see what's in their own attics and basements and dig out the photographs and things. And we were able, through the grant, through the Rock the Day funds that FFRPL raised for us in 2020, hire a couple of students as well as some project managers, including Miko, to actually use resources in the library. So they have been using scanning equipment in the library to digitize photographs, create all the metadata that we librarian folks need to have in order to make those things accessible. And when the digitization is done, those materials will be uploaded to the library's access points on New York Heritage and added to our Rochester Voices collection, so that these will truly be accessible to the community at large. And so it's been such a pleasure for me to have folks like Miko, and we've had two brilliant students who have been working on the digitization project. And as Miko mentioned, they're getting some, on the job training by doing this, learning about scanning, learning about the library field. And apparently they've been enjoying it. So I'm so happy to hear that too, Miko.
Yes, someone, Jada, who was with us in January, someone texted my phone and says, I hear that there's a good job at the library, and I was like, Jada, who is this? Oh no, I just was spreading the word about, what I've been doing at the library. And it was good. Exposure is everything. And so the project and the work that we've been doing really touches on more than one pathway. Like I can't even explain more than one pathway. But most importantly, it's the relationship building and the community building. Most importantly, trust. The trusting aspect is paramount. And as I get into a little bit about a recent, a family that came in just on Friday, it's very intimate. You know, the process isn't just, okay, you drop off your materials and we'll give you a call. You're really embedding yourself into their stories to make it's more meaningful and makes the work more meaningful and very impactful. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And so what Miko is talking, are you able to share your screen, Miko?
I am, yes.
So what Miko has been talking about too is as families are lending their materials for digitization, the families are actually coming here and sitting with Miko and the students and having conversations so that they can document the information you're seeing in the photo. So, you know, that is really the key piece there, is that it is so collaborative.
The documentation piece, and I'm going to go ahead, is very, very important. I never understood why every single picture in my household, there was always a date and the name and what was taking place, right? And my mother would always say, nope, did you write your name? Did you do the date? And because it's very important for the metadata process, you know, very, very important for that reason. This is part of the Bobby Johnson collection. Bobby Johnson is still currently with us today, known for being a prolific writer, poet, performer, and also has published 5 books in his collection. And as of Friday, his wife was able to donate, I don't know if you're aware, one of his books, because 2 are actually located in the local library, and we were able to find out that there is one in the Arnett branch, but making sure that it's all in, and that's another thing, the centralization of resources, making sure we're pulling everything together and have it being a part of specifically the contributions of Bobby Johnson. So yes, she was able to donate one of the books to the library. That was great. So here we see in reference to the community, specifically the 3rd Ward, it was once a community that celebrated the camaraderie. It celebrated the Black joy of the community, amazing jazz, but also images and documentation also speak to the redlining and the urban renewal and the racist policies that basically impacted and served as its destruction. So a lot of what we've been collecting and archiving fits in all those categories. But this is Bobby Johnson. Bobby Johnson is here. And this was the fact that he attended the school, 2 very relevant schools in the neighborhood. You'll see a lot of images and documentation regarding Immaculate Conception or Number 3 School or Madison High School. Let's see here, a little background of more intense background that his wife was able to provide as well. Coming right from the source, primary source. Did I get that right, Christine? A primary source?
Well, this would be a secondary
source. All right. And I should know that as a teacher. I really should. And this is an image of Bobby Johnson, a pillar in the community. He is now 92 years old. 92 years old. And some of his performances, although I found out that this performance did not take place in the 3rd Ward or on Clarissa Street, but a lot of his work did. A lot of his work was also published, several in the Frederick Douglass newspaper. So we've been able to collect newspaper articles. Like I said, he was a poet. And in here, he also referenced in the previous slide, Howard W. Coles, another resource that was archived as well, spoke to, and I'm sure we're all familiar with Charles Price, the first Black police officer in Rochester, who also was featured in our Clarissa Uprooted documentary. We were able to capture his oral history as well. So between him and my father, they passed with like in a couple months, but we were able to capture some very, very relevant information from them. The historic Elks Parade, in which we are scheduled to meet over at the Elks, located on Clarissa Street this Friday, to see what they were still able to maintain in their possession, to dive a little deeper into the Elks collection per se, that is still currently housed in that building. Hopefully we can get that archived and placed as a part of the collection as well. One of the schools that I mentioned, a high school, Madison High School, that dated back, I see yearbooks that date back from 1948 up until like the 70s when the school was demolished. So I was able to put that connection together as well. Once again, the celebration the annual celebrations that would take place on Clarissa Street. Some other documentation, flyers we're finding. Another piece of the collection, the annual Clarissa Street reunion that takes place every third Saturday in August. We were able to capture all the artwork and the programs dating back to 1993 or 94, but this was also in a part of the Bobby Johnson collection as well. Jamaica Live. This is circa 1978. The neighborhood is also known for the Pithod and Sheps, where a lot of rich jazz culture actually stemmed from, and there's connections to the annual Jazz Fest that we see today. But many well-known artists and musicians have come through the neighborhood as well. Inside one of the local jazz scenes in the Third Ward, Clarissa Street, I love how families have been captured, very intimate photos of family. And then they give you this whole breakdown story of how Uncle Bobby got to Rochester from Florida. And that's another segment that many of our humanities scholars are diving into as well, the Great Migration. And family. So I had a great opportunity just diving in and just listening to the stories centered around the initial capturing and collection of the Bobby Johnson collection. And we're due to meet again in 2 weeks. She says, I have a whole box I'm bringing. I said, okay, we're working this together, the actual process, and we're learning and building. And I'm just confident in great things to come. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Miko, can you talk about what's coming next? Because, part of the reason that we're digitizing all of these photographs and everything is, of course, for posterity, that we want to have all of these things accessible to the community and to researchers. But you also have a project coming up in June that will allow the public another opportunity to experience all of this. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes. A part of the work that I do in collaboration with Teen Empowerment, I'm sorry, I'm not all into titles, but just to give some background, currently serving as the exhibit project manager. I have a wonderful opportunity of working with amazing elders, youth, community partners, humanities scholars, exhibit experts. We will be capturing and showcasing that work and the history as far as the thriving community, the Black joy, the racist policies, urban renewal. That will be reflected in our exhibition scheduled to be placed at the RIT City Arts Space. And mind you, RIT is also a collaborative partner in this work from June 3rd until July 24th. And I'm starting because I'm so excited. And during this time, some amazing events will be captured as a replica of the Pithod, famous Pithod Club will be a part of our exhibition. And it will be taking place during this year's Jazz Fest. So there's going to be a lot of programming, activities for families and for individuals to kind of highlight the history, once again, of Clarissa Street and the Third Ward community. And many of the images that you will see and documentations that will be presented in the exhibit will also be a part of the collection with the local history and genealogy department. So mark your calendars, June 3rd through July 24th at RIT's City Art Space, Liberty Pole Way. And I included the website there for you all to explore as well.
Great, that is in the chat. It's clarissauprooted.org. And again, I have to tell you, just please go visit review the documentary and attend this exhibit. I have been amazed from working with the students and the elders in this project, just that it's so impactful for the students involved and the elders involved, I think, to be able to learn from each other and be able to capture this history in a way that I think a lot of our youth aren't experienced in doing. They're not able to have those kinds of connections in the way that this is giving them. So the next thing I just want to talk about, and I do see some questions in the chat, so we will get back to those in just a minute, but whoops, something's happening here. Here we go. So something else that Miko can talk a little bit about is, I mentioned earlier that we had received some grant monies through the University at Albany from an NEH grant to inventory urban renewal records at the city of Rochester. And, as Miko was mentioning, what happened in the Third Ward was that this vibrant African-American residential and business district was decimated during urban renewal. So many of the businesses and the houses that were in that area were torn down. This tight-knit community was forced to disperse, and we don't have anything like it anymore in the city. And so it becomes very hard for most of us to imagine what that was like. And we're now seeking to better understand how that process happened. And it did not just happen in the Third Ward, it happened throughout Rochester. We had one of the highest numbers of urban renewal projects in New York State, and that so many of our neighborhoods were touched by this. And so with this grant money, I've been able to hire a couple of consultants who have been able to come in and inventory all of these records. And we've discovered that there are more than 150 boxes of these records in the city of Rochester's Record Center on Andrews Street. And they include appraisal records, property assessments, photographs of every house and building that was demolished during this time period. And the other thing that really has struck me are the handwritten interview notes, that there were the assessors, when they would go through and they would interview the residents as they're trying to get them to sell their properties or forcing them to sell their properties. And you can read a lot between the lines in these. Sometimes they're only a 1-page long. They're all on these pink sheets. And, you know, I remember really being struck by one that I pulled out, and it was a record of a meeting that the assessor had with a woman property owner there. And, you know, he wrote something along the lines of, you know, I told her this was our final price, and if she didn't accept it, we'd start eminent domain procedures and she'd be out of there by Christmas. So, you know, you could read the threats between the lines here. The other one that really struck me, and Miko, you will remember this too, one of the gentlemen who we're working with on the Clarissa Street project found property files for one of his family's homes.
Yes.
And it was a situation where the family had been told several years in advance that their property was going to be part of this urban renewal area. And, you know, basically we're told there's no sense investing in this property. We're just coming in to tear it down anyway. And so, you know, over time, as they're waiting for all the property transfers to take place, the family moves away, the home is left vacant. There's an assessment record and an offer for a sale of the property. And then while the property's vacant, it's vandalized and there's a fire. And what happens is the Urban Renewal Agency then comes back to the family and they say, well, now your property's damaged, so we're going to have to pay you less for it. And then after they've reduced the sales price, they come back once again and they say, and because your property is damaged, it needs to be torn down, which was the plan all along, right? It needs to be torn down. And now we're going to charge you for the cost of demolition. And so they further reduced the payment to cover the cost of demolition for a property that they intended to tear down all along. And you just really start to see the insidious nature of this process and how the system was taking advantage people and driving people out. And it really is disturbing when you get in and can see it at that granular level and see how it's affecting individual people. And then as part of the Clarissa Street Reunion Project and the Clarissa Uprooted Project, we had elders in from the community. And in this photograph, you see Catherine Sprague Dexter, whose family had lived in Clarissa Street. And we brought some of these elders in to look at the property records from their families. And Miko, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that will contribute to the exhibit project?
The
urban renewal records and the family's experiences in viewing these records, because we actually had film crews in recording some of these things. I think we'll get to see some of those in the exhibit. Is that right?
Yes. One of the things I'm just multitasking, and I'm looking at a comment in the chat, and I hope to address that as I'm speaking about the urban renewal experience. Initially, we were all excited that these records were even located and we had access to them because they were a part of the municipal records for the city of Rochester. Is that correct, Christine?
Yes.
Okay, all righty. So as we were looking through the binders, the energy would often change. Very solemn, very reflective for me as well, and any other individual, my generation and younger, because we always just heard stories about what their house once looked like. Like, it's still hard for me to this day, no matter how often I would walk this neighborhood, to envision there was a grocery store, there was a hotel, there was, so many businesses. And at the time, and even to this day, this particular area, the Third Ward, had more Black-owned businesses than presently today. And seeing their reaction to that was very moving. But as we've been working on this project, we've all established relationships and community amongst ourselves. So by us being in that intimate space at that intimate moment, of course, we are there to support and have been supporting those that tend to process and understand, like, this is very deeply rooted, and it has transcended through generations, especially when you're talking about generational wealth. When you're talking about those thriving businesses that once resided, what does that say about wealth or the equity in homes? I currently live in the area now. Everyone is familiar with the cost of living in the Cornhill Historic District. And having them see, the elders see how their homes were sold for pennies on a dollar. It was very emotional for them, very emotional for them. But as we are walking in this space together, we provide that space, that safe place and that safe space, and still able to answer and ask questions and give hugs and capture those moments. Their permission, of course, to capture those moments, because a lot of times with history, it's hard to connect to history when there is no sound or no voice to it. So this actually helps us understand the emotional and psychological devastation, not just with this community, but we know that throughout the United States, the impact that urban renewal has had through for once thriving African-American communities, specifically in New York State, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. So yes, so I hope that answers that question. And yes, the elders just love being in the presence of youth, even during the most intimate, emotional spaces. We're family, you know, we've connected in that way. We've connected in that way. I hope that answered your question in the chat. I just saw that one come up.
Thank you. And we're going to get to all of the questions in the chat. So I just want to wrap up a little bit. And Miko, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I just want to talk a little bit more about the library's next steps, because I talked early on about this archive of Black history and culture. And I am delighted that we have received approximately $20,000 grant from the Rochester Area Community Foundation to advance this work. And so we are about to embark on that project, and it'll begin with establishing a 10-member advisory board. And this is a board that will be comprised of people within the community. And we're going to do an open call for applicants to do that. And then it'll be folks from some of our member or from our partner organizations who will help, people like Miko, who will be helping us make decisions about who will join that committee, so that it's really meant to be a community advisory board. And this is really important because the archive we're trying to develop here in the library is meant to be a community curated archive. And we mean that in the broadest possible sense, that it will be this community board that will be developing the mission and vision statements, developing the collection policy, and developing a strategic plan and guiding this archive as we go forward. And this process is forcing us to look at different models for archiving, in that, you know, in the past, it often has been that a collecting institution would ask donors to turn over all of the rights to their materials. And we need to find new ways of doing that, because, you know, people don't always want to turn over their rights. They want to be able to control their own history and legacy. And so we're looking at new models. And part of that starts with this Clarissa Street photo digitization process, because in most cases, people are keeping the photographs. They're contributing to that. They are allowing us to digitize them and allowing us to use those and to share those with the community, but they still keep that physical photograph. So I think that's really important. So this community advisory board will be looking to get appointed in the next month or two. And one thing I really want to point out here is that this grant from the Community Foundation is allowing us to pay these board members. You know, too often our white dominant institutions tend to call upon African Americans and other marginalized groups to share their talents and expertise with us without any compensation. And we need to change that. And so when we embarked on this project, we decided it was really important to be able to pay the people who were contributing to this project. And so we have $1,200 per advisory board member. And, you know, it's not enough. It's not enough, but it's $1,200 for a year's commitment to join this advisory board. And I think that's really important. You know, I'm engaged in another project in our community right now where we're asking a lot of volunteers, and there was nothing built into the process to compensate people. And it's hard. It makes it difficult. So we're trying to avoid that. And the board will be looking at the themes, the organization, the individuals, helping to identify who, what, where they think is important to document, and helping to engage with our stakeholders in the community. We will also, with the grant, be able to hire a project consultant to do the coordination with the board, provide facilitation at meetings, logistical support, assist with community outreach and reporting. And we are already working on, through a partnership with the Rochester Regional Library Council, a survey that has gone out to existing historical repositories. So, you know, museums, archives who already are collecting materials, to try to identify what exists in their collections that document our African American heritage. And then through the advisory board, we will be doing similar outreach with organizations in the community who are not set up to be collecting things, but through their everyday activities are creating records that will be of historical importance, and connecting with them to find ways to preserve that. So that's what we're going to be working on in the next few months. And I also want to point out that we've spoken today primarily about our efforts around African American history, but the library is engaging in a number of other projects to capture other traditionally marginalized communities. The other very significant community is the LGBTQ community here in Rochester. And next year, maybe when we convene again, if Susan will invite me back, I should have some very exciting news about some projects we have related to LGBTQ history and expanding our collections here at the library about that. And so with that, I have contact information up here for myself and some links to information about Clarissa Uprooted and teen empowerment. And Miko and I will be happy to take questions.